the public sector lens?
Yeah, no, appreciate the question. And I would say when it comes to, despite having clearly defined goals, why organizations still struggle with execution is it's really about understanding how you operationalize that strategy into your organization, right? You can have these goals, but without systems and cadence in play in order to establish, that rhythm that you need to deliver on these on your goals, I think that's where a lot of companies struggle. So, for example, if you look at that weight loss goal that you may have at the beginning of the year, right? You may want to lose 10 pounds and that's your goal, right? But in order to lose that weight, there's a series of cadence and rhythm that you need to establish there, right? In terms of exercising and eating properly and so forth, right? And implementing that change into your daily rhythms, that's something new, right? And I think that's where organizations struggle when it comes to connecting goal with execution, is really understanding, how do we implement it within our existing rhythms? How do we take that strategy and make sure that our teams are able to deliver that? And that's done through establishing systems and processes, right? Cadence that allows us to continually report on what our goal is. And by doing that, we're creating clarity at every level, right? And so I think that's one of the biggest things, is that, it's one thing to have a goal. It's another thing to know that I need to eat right on a daily basis, right? That I need to cut out carbs. I need to cut out sugar and so on and so forth, right? I need to be going to the gym on a recurring basis, right? That is all about change. And so it's understanding how we take that goal and that strategy and how we implement that change within our existing, processes and so forth, and establishing processes for that. And I think that's where, where it does become a challenge for a lot of organizations. But Chris, I'll love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So from my vantage point, on the government side, as well as even on the private sector side, most of the time, very rarely do you see clear defined goals in the first place. Especially on government side, whether it's municipal level or state level or national level. A lot of times people who read these documents that are meant to guide the success of an organization, a lot of people assume, the ones who write it, assume that people reading it and are supposed to implement it know exactly what you're talking about. And so very rarely have I seen clearly defined goals or objectives. When there are, in that miracle state that there are clearly defined goals, why do they still struggle with execution? In addition to the lack of understanding, like I mentioned just a second ago, it's the fact that a lot of people really don't want to take responsibility for the actions that they're responsible for. So for example, in the government side, whenever there's a plan or a strategy document, typically there's an additional document or a subset of the document called an implementation guidance or an implementation plan. And normally, if it's a single organization or one of those federal agencies that has several departments or sub-offices below it, they're not specific on who's responsible for executing those goals within the agency. And so you have one senior leader at the top, or maybe several senior leaders at the top, and then several below in the mid-level that are all pointing to each other saying, this is your job, not mine. And because of no specific point of contact or directed individual, people then start to have issues. So I've seen that in a lot of the current agencies that I've supported over the last decade where this has happened, and everything just gets all gobbed up. And then finally, when you do have a clear chain of command, if you will, or a clear directive approach, and people understand it and people know who's responsible for it, the other problem is timing. There's no time scale stamped to it of when they're expected to achieve it. And because of that, people will usually put that as a future issue to deal with at a later date, and they keep pushing it off while the problems of the now take over their lives, and then they end up forgetting that they're responsible for that. So then at the end of the year, or however long that strategy or plan is targeted for, then they go, oh, we didn't achieve this goal. like, oh, well, and then the fingers start pointing back at each other again and saying, oh, that was you. So, those are just a few things. There are several reasons, but those are just the ones that come to mind.
Wow, that's great.